There's so much to say, so much to talk about. I'm already giving you a warning. We're going to give you a briefer version than you could actually read so that we can get through this podcast. But this hopefully will be a big appetizer for you to pick up your copy and read, excuse me, while I skip a beat, Working to Reinvent My Life and Leadership as a White Guy. I'm Carole Copeland Thomas, and I am really happy to introduce my long term friend who has written an epic book, Robert Principe. Buckle your seatbelt and get ready for the podcast that will take you on a special journey designed to elevate and empower your cross cultural appreciation for communities around the world. Hello, I'm Carole Copeland Thomas. I'm your host of Conversations with Carole, the weekly show that connects culture with collaboration and community. Welcome aboard. Hello, Robert.
Carole, thank you. Times of thank you. That's wonderful. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you for doing this with me.
Well, I have a lot to say. I have a lot to ask about, and I'm going to continue to learn as I learned through this epic book that is considerably lengthy, but for a very good reason, with lots of examples, countless examples. Everything has been fact checked. So this is a fact-based book and not fake news that we unfortunately are subject to far too often. First of all, Robert, give us the identity when you're talking about gender identity, when you're talking about Robert Principe. Who is Robert Principe?
Hmm. Well, Carole, there's
And
a
I'm pronouncing Principe correct.
oh well, you're pronouncing the anglicized version, Carole. That's a whole story by itself, right? I mean,
Okay.
I'm Italian American, so hang on a second.
Yes, yeah. Want to hear about the correct pronunciation.
Well, if I knew it for sure, here's a story.
Hmm.
I don't know, maybe I'm 10, maybe I'm 12. I'm walking with my dad, Dominic Alfred Principe, and my Uncle Lou. You would have loved Uncle Lou. And I don't know what came to my head, but I said, why do grandma and grandpa, how come they don't speak the language? Right. Because nobody really spoke Italian around me periodically, right? And I don't know, it was my dad and my uncle, so well, we got to fit in. So my point is, you asked me how to pronounce my name. I don't speak the language. I don't speak my language. All of that culture, language, identity. Italians would respell their names to lose the value sorry, the vowel at the end of the name, so to be more Anglo.
Hmm.
Uh, Walasinski became Wallace. Southern and Eastern European immigrants, turn of the century, went through a similar, nothing like what happened with people who couldn't take their skin color off.
Right, right.
White folks had to assimilate, not integrate. So I don't know the correct pronunciation of my name because it's anglicized. And that's part of the history that white folks don't pay enough, pay close enough attention to. Because
Yeah,
that's the
that's
truth about our history.
yeah, yeah. And also, you are a New York Italian American, correct? Yes.
No, and everybody thinks, oh, New York, this very diverse. Nope. My neighborhood was completely segregated. I always say I learned about race and ethnicity at a distance.
Hmm.
Race because folks that were non-white lived in those other neighborhoods that you had all the stereotypes about how you got to be careful going into them and when
Right.
and who and how. And ethnicity, we didn't embrace who we were as Italian, German, French, Polish, etc. We made fun of each other. We call each other names.
Hmm. Hmm.
There was no richness of connection there. There's a
Right.
bad legacy passed on to us. And I believe it's a root cause of our challenge today.
Well, that's a great way to begin our conversation. And you talked about the fact that you really didn't have any close connections with particularly African Americans as a child. Your family talked about African Americans, etc., used language that wasn't very appropriate,
Complimentary, certainly.
complimentary. So that we understand. So we now have sort of placed you in terms of your background, your ethnicity, growing up in New York, etc. Um, uh, what was the genesis for you actually writing a book like this? And maybe you can share with us your background in terms of the multicultural work that you've done for decades now.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting to rethink. One of my themes in my book is the three R's. I absolutely need to revisit, to rethink how I got where I am today. If I'm going to reinvent, that's the title, that's in the book,
Correct.
reinvent. My participation in the system is a subtitle here
Hmm.
because I got to work for systemic change. It's not about feel good. It's got to be about systemic change. So, um, you know, uh, I like to think. I mean, I was a musician. I was a music educator. I was a high school and college band director for 27 years. So my work was to bring people together to make music, an ensemble. I always use the analogy, you could be a fabulous any kind of player, trumpet or whatever, but if you don't listen well, you're a lousy musician. You're just making noise. So that's a root piece that was my first entree,
Hmm.
1992. I was at the college, Holy Cross College, and there was a racial incident on campus. The BSU, Black Student Union, spent almost 2 weeks getting the college to close down classes to talk about the issues. And the word went out, if you got any ideas about what to do, and that's why I said, well, I ended up creating a campus-wide event that lasted a whole year in preparation. All the multicultural student organizations, BSU, LASO, which is Latin American students, Asian American, Women's Forum, the white planning group that ran the planning board.
Hmm.
They all did presentations on race and gender as they perceived it on campus, right? So it was a transfer for me of building spaces where people could speak truth to
Hmm.
each other. You see, the distinctive part about that is if I'm going to talk about race as a white person versus you, Carole, as a woman of color, however you call yourself in terms of your racial identity, we got to be able to be honest about the different life experiences.
Right.
And that's the distinctive quality to the conversation. So how did the book come about? I started in 1992. I've been, in higher ed, secondary. I was a senior manager for diversity at the trial court, massive 101 courts, 6,200 employees around the state. I mean, I've been in lots of environments. Then as a consultant also, where I continue to try to create spaces for people to do what they needed to do to come together. Again, to learn the truth about the different realities of people's lives based on race, based on gender, based on sexual orientation, gender identity. But then what do you do with that information? Application, right? So,
Yeah.
as you point out, the story's got a ton of both sides of the coin of those that have been had access and those that have been held out of access
Mhm.
to explain their experience. But then the work needs to be, how do I apply that learning given the voices unheard being heard?
Yeah. I'm not surprised now. First of all, I realize that we're 1 year apart in age. You're just a little older than I am, just 1 year, and 27 years in the music field. My undergraduate degree was in music.
Oh,
So
that.
it just it gets more and more fascinating as we speak. So again, we have been contemporaries in terms of our consulting practices for quite some time. That's how we have come together We're both part of the Northeast Human Resources Associated. I just honored them because they refused to walk away from the word equity. So we have that in common as well. When tell us, and then I want to really go into the book itself. Who is this book for? Who will appreciate this book? And I kept asking myself that question, chapter after question, chapter, just because of the stories, the examples that you had in there. Robert Principe, tell us, who is this book for?
Well, I got in trouble with publishers, which is why I had to self-publish because they're like, you needed a very specific audience. So they asked me the same question. I'm laughing because I've had this conversation so many times. And I go, well, here's my audience, us, we the people. Now, that's nuts. We say that to a publisher, but I can say it very specifically here. It's
Mhm.
three groups if you need to break it down.
Okay.
It's the workplace, leaders and individual contributors across all roles, all levels need to be better equipped in the work environment to build an inclusive work environment. Number one. Number two, our communities, everyday citizens who need to get connected in a way that they can go into town policies, practices, and procedures and see with by the way, I'm in a strategic planning group in my hometown. You got to think global, act local. I'm the chair of the town's policy advisory committee who's charged with looking at policies and procedures in the town through a diversity, equity, inclusion lens. So that's the local piece. And then finally, teachers and students in certainly secondary ed and higher ed, where they can study in the book and you use these examples to then determine how they want to begin to practice or continue their practice, to be change agents, to move into the system and create. So I know that's nuts in terms of like a publisher. Well, that's not specific enough. Sorry, I'm not looking to be specific enough to please you. I'm looking
Mhm.
to create the change we need. And boy, do we need it. I know
Yeah.
somebody that said there was a 10 alarm fire going on, and I'm looking at that person, Carole Copeland Thomas, just last week, because
Yeah.
that's the truth about where we've landed.
So true. So true. What about white men? Where do white men fit in with your book?
Sure. Well, I had to be very careful all along the way, and people, even though I've been doing this work for over 30 years, I'll tell you a direct quote. This is from women, especially white women, I'll be honest, saying, if you're going to write a book and tell us what to do, I'm putting the book down because, don't do that. And I get it because the white, for as a white male, I have to stay in the work of the revisit to rethink because I've had a lifetime of uninterrupted access. What does that mean? Never because of race or gender, for example, have I not had access to the basics of life: healthcare, housing, wages, finances, education.
Yeah.
That's not where it stops. And
Right.
I'm talking about white men right now.
You
So
talk about that throughout your book. Yeah.
I have therefore been able to develop a quality of life full of mobility, stability, and safety.
Mhm.
That is a global anomaly. So it's very distinctive work for me to rethink that reality and how I got there versus, well, I just worked real hard. No, sorry. That's not the whole picture by any means, and it
Right.
hasn't been for generations. So it's a very different work for me at versus you to
Mhm.
create greater access and equity that can create greater health and well-being for more of us, not just some of us.
I hope that at some point in the future you will gather a focus group of men, white men, who have read your book and record the conversations. That will be rich.
I did. I already have.
Oh
I
my.
told you I was. Yeah, there's another part of this book stuff. I got somebody working to revamp my website around the book, and they said, "Oh, we'll record you talking about this. Record you talking about it." I said, "No, no, 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 no. This is about conversations across different life experiences and identities."
Mhm.
So I pulled 8.5 hours worth of different configurations of folks speaking to the work, except
Hmm.
for one. One group is all white men. So I'll share that with you. Good,
I would love to hear that. Hear
I
about
hear
that.
you.
So the book has 8 chapters, four different parts, and then at the end, epilogue, let's talk. Walk us through just the four parts to the book
Sure.
and why they are configured the way they are.
Well, I wrote the book to tell them the story of the work, me trying to understand and do the work. But I have to continue to have the book writing, research and writing, me continue to do the work. So I started in the first person. The first chapter is did I say I was
Did I
white?
say I'm white? Yes.
Owning, you know, the reality that race matters,
Hmm.
period. Okay. In terms of equity or lack thereof. And then chapter
Hmm.
two is, did I say I was a white guy owning my role in perpetuating gender inequality? And then begin to move into what's distinguished work for me as a white cisgender heterosexual guy to try to be an activist for greater access and equity for more of us, not just some of us. It's a different challenge for me. And I
Hmm.
try to both,
So part two is the disruption part.
yes, yes,
Okay. So for
yeah.
part one, you're basically identifying, explaining who you are in the various examples. Then the disruption, the activists start with part two. You can continue on from there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like there is where it is put it into practice, right? To be able to, and people get awful, oh, disrupt. And I'm like, well, the status quo is not serving our needs.
Right.
Come on.
Right.
And there's a lot of examples in the book of
Hmm.
I exemplify where that's challenged in so many ways, including our children.
Hmm.
Not healthy. So we need to think about change. I use that term. I kind of like it. I hope it gets some traction, this idea of becoming a relentless equity solution seeker. A
Hmm.
relentless
Hmm.
equity solution seeker. That becomes and again, if I've got this anomaly.
That's RESS that you had in the book also.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. If I got a life that's an anomaly of never interrupted, then towards the end of the book it gets at this issue of paying it forward. I got to pay it forward. You know
So
what, Carol?
tell us about part three. Tell
Yeah.
us the
Um,
gist of part three.
well, it gets, I spend one of the largest chapters in the book is this idea of speaking the truth, where generations of BIPOC Americans exemplify the resistance and resilience that is absolutely necessary to create this change. Um, and people sometimes bristle at singling out popular. Well, sorry, that's what this history tells us. And BIPOC people use different terms. Black, indigenous people of color. That includes, what Asian Americans have done in this country, what Latino and Latinx people have done in this country, etc. What low-income people are, what women have done. It's all these people that are have become in the system
Mhm.
underserved, underrepresented, but they exemplify the lifetime and
Sure. And then part four.
Yeah, so all of that is to then say, is a vision and a hope that we can together, given it don't work individually, and then figure out collaborative efforts and partnerships, which, by the way, people every day are doing. We don't hear enough about it. It's as much a part of the problem as anything else. The media does not serve our needs to hear the goodness of people working every day for change, for our health and well-being. So a reinvention of a new public will for the common good,
Mhm.
right? Now, Carol, as I'm saying this, we know the environment we're living in May of 2025. There's everything being done to dismantle and divide us so we cannot be a strong, we the people, for the change we
Correct.
need.
Right.
Right. So the context, I got to say that because that's the context. But then the final piece is this idea of pay it forward.
Mm.
And that's my final piece. If even on a collective basis, there's so many challenges.
Mhm.
I still got to find my sphere of influence.
Mhm.
That's why I'm doing what I'm doing,
Right. Well,
including right here in my hometown of Holliston, 88.6% white, high socioeconomic, etc. The work, this is Holliston needs to become part of the solution, not part of the problem, as it is, not because it's a bad place,
mhm.
but
Mhm.
because we're segregated.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go to the part of the book where you talk about Andrew Carnegie. And it is in chapter 7. I know we're sort of starting toward the end of the book. I'll take you back to the beginning. But that I perked up with his reference and what he did as a young man, and then the fortune that he made, and then how he used his fortune, because he is one of the centerpieces for the book Think and Grow Rich, that I'm now part of a mastermind group that goes over that book routinely. And he is certainly held up because of the achievements that he did. Talk to us about Andrew Carnegie, who he was, and the importance that he was. You talk about a number of industrialists, but I bring him up in particular. He's a white guy, made a lot of money, but then did a lot of good. Tell us about that, Robert Principe.
Well, Carol, see, this is where America needs to rethink its identity. If I can be as start as broadly as that, because the narrative around a Carnegie, around a Ford, around all these individuals that were held up as heroes for tons of reasons is completely void of the systemic reality that gave them the access to do what they did. Um, that's what I focused on in the book.
Hmm.
Because Carnegie, I mean, some of his language was completely hierarchical in defining citizenry. His whole thing around philanthropy, et cetera, was we know what to do because we've been successful as
Hmm.
industrialists. And oh my God, if I link that to what's happened to the environment as a result of that, I'm going to use the word worship of that kind of progress. Let's also talk about that's American ideology.
Hmm.
Progress almost at all costs. Well, here we are.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
So,
you look at Carnegie
yeah.
and you look at how he made his money with steel. I think it was some 300 or 600 miles away in terms of where his uh, plants were, et cetera, and the working conditions of the workers, of which he made, who were productive, and from that productivity, that's where his profits came. So, I mean, it's starkly different in terms of, and no different than any of the other robber barons. That's why they called them robber barons during that time, of how they made money, how they accumulated wealth, even though he was a philanthropist, but the people on the ground who made the money for someone like an Andrew Carnegie. I think that's the point that you're probably trying to make.
Well, well, yes. See, that's interesting, Carol. As you bring that out. Yes, they're built. I'll use this phrase. I'm telling you, there's some folks out there going to listen to this and be, oh my God, here's these revisionists. They're trying to rewrite history. Okay, built on the backs of. But see, if I stay in my systemic lens,
Mhm.
the system was set up that way. It struggled to better pay workers. And in the meantime, the wealth accumulated by the Carnegies of the world grew and grew and
Mm.
grew. Okay. So yes, the workers, and we'll look at the environmental piece. Where environmentally, when what neighborhoods was stuff being done that the environmental consequences of were concentrated. It wasn't in Carnegie's backyard. Let me put it that way.
Oh, way it was in the working class neighborhoods, etc. Yes, yeah. Work and those who worked for him, these company towns that they had. So yeah, they suffered the most. So I wanted to start there, and I want to back up now, because again, this book has countless stories, countless opportunities to learn historically about our country and about the world, and then about your quest to really help people to unify through um, our strengths and our diversity in a way that is going to bring about the relentless equity solution seekers that we actually need. That was part of the beginning of your book that we move on with. So tell us about um, your book starts off with health disparities, about how the access of health that you have had versus people of color. You also mentioned COVID at the beginning. I immediately thought about my thoughts in March of 2020, where I thought, because of what I was reading, that COVID was going to primarily hit white audiences, maybe older white people. And then very quickly, within 30 days, I realized, others realized that no, this is going to be much different than what you ever thought would actually happen. And that people of color, particularly first line folks, first people who were on the front lines of grocery stores or bus drivers. I remember the bus driver who was coughed at in Detroit, and he was so angry. This woman had a terrible cough. He ended up dying of COVID. And so you look at those individuals who were exposed to COVID up front. I lost friends from COVID because of the work that they were doing versus just the overall health opportunities of white communities. So talk to us about that and how that relates to the rest of that first half of your book.
Yeah, well, it's the back to the systems piece, right? There was a point in the whole reality of COVID in this country that access to safety and distance from the disease was not equitable, to your point. See, this is the thing. And then, who wants to talk about preconditions that people were more susceptible given the historic reality of lack of health care access in particular communities, just happens to be, low income communities of color, urban environments, et cetera, right? And service sector workers exposed every day,
Right.
right? It was important, obviously, because I started to write the book in 21, um, having just left the trial court. Most of my tenure, the trial court was on Zoom, given COVID, but I could do that. My job enabled, and I trained around the state on Zoom. We did go, but not for long because we couldn't, to courts around the state. Um, so again, it's another example. This is, I think, and you tell me what you think, Carole. Our lack of ability to think systemically, to see outcomes as a result of what the system does and doesn't do, as everyday citizens, not just if I'm the mayor or if I'm a town council person or no, because we don't spend enough time
Mhm.
discerning the effectiveness of the system as it functions. Code was a credible example, and a lot of people suffered because of it unequitably.
I think,
Unequitably.
yeah, I think most people are, particularly those who are the working class, the ones who have to punch a clock or whatever, their orientation is task oriented and taking care of your responsibilities, not having many opportunities to question the system or to have the kind of discussions that would help um, inform each other about how the system either works for you or works against you. Certainly, the thing I really like about your book is you have so much historical information in here, which you and I probably know. We've had the conversations where people have said, "Oh, we just give us pretty much give us the recipe we need to solve our problems. We don't need all of the other informational points. We've already done race, we've already done gender. Just give us what we need." And that to me is code words for we're not interested in anything that happened in the past. We just want a recipe to solve our problems so that our people will come to work, do what they have to do, leave, and we can continue on in that manner. And what you're saying is, no, that's not disruptive. And that's absolutely no way to change the system at all. So let me go back and I want to ask you because in the early part of the book, you talk about Ida B. Wells and the formation of the NAACP, National Association of Colored Women, et cetera, and a lot of these stories and groups that you didn't know about. And these, I grew up with these stories. I know these individuals and I learned more and more. And I know for a fact that Ida B. Wells was excluded from being recognized as one of the founders of the NAACP. So that speaks to sexism within the Black community. Sexism is huge in the Black church, huge. And we're basically trying to get through that as we speak. So give us the salient points of that part of your book, which is part of part one, in identifying yourself, but also identifying these gender related issues.
The first thing I thought of though, and I hear, I think you'll remember one story, the gender on the chapter on gender. So this is another thing for a white guy. Are you going to admit what you don't know? Are you going to admit the patterns, and you got to, where you keep doing that?
Mhm.
How I told you, you read so there's this chapter about the woman that was working in environmental stuff, and this individual spoke about, and off the top of my head, I can't remember her name, but she spoke to how she worked with organizations and companies, and I was like, she got them, she did what? She was able to get them to do what? And she's a, this, see, I gotta voice my stereotypes.
Right.
She's a
Yeah.
woman. Okay?
Mhm.
She had that power.
Mhm.
Because I think, oh, how are they going to listen to her? That pops into my. That's the other thing about stereotypes, right, Carol? You know this, right? They're not something you can control. They're there.
They're there.
They're
Yes.
there. They're going to pop in. You just got to
Mhm.
know what happens. You got to know how to contradict them, right? Or
Mhm.
the story in the book about what my daughter called me out on speaking on a panel,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, about the whole issue of sexual abuse and sexual assault and harassment and so forth, or the beginning of the Me Too movement. And I'm on the panel. There's 5, 6, 7 people, and we go through the whole presentation, and we all talk and we all speak. And I'm debriefing with my daughter the next day, and I stopped myself and said, "Wait a second, I was the only male on the panel,"
Mhm.
and we kept going. And then I said, wait. I'm just realized the next day that I was the only male on a panel about sexual assault, harassment, et cetera, et cetera. And she said to
Wow.
me, Dad, you are showing your blankety blank male stuff where you just go and do and you're oblivious. She
Mhm.
called me out.
Mhm.
She didn't call me out because I didn't say. I said I didn't even realize. She said
Right.
no woman would sit on a panel of five, six people if she was the only woman and not recognize the fact that she was
Right.
the only woman on the panel.
Right. Right. Right.
So all that to say about the gender piece. And then I actually, when you reference Ida B. Wells, I was actually thinking about the reality that for white folks, when you hear stories about the civil rights movement and all the changes, et cetera, it's all the big names.
Mm. Well, and yeah, and
It's
Ida B.
not the
Wells.
rest of the
Yeah.
rest of the narrative
Ooh, and
and
she
the
was
people involved,
way
the
before
community.
King and way before Rosa
Yeah.
Parks, and she was one of the forerunners back in the late 1800s in terms of civil rights and documenting all the lynchings that took place. She actually had to run from the town she was living in up north because they were trying to kill her. So she was a champion, a real champion journalist, and everybody in the National Association of Black Journalists, I'm a part of that group too. They know Ida B. Wells. She's a real stalwart, real stalwart. And there were some race riots that took place in Elaine, Arkansas, that she did some intervention in and helped men to not become to get executed because of what had happened to them. So yeah, she's a real champion. She is. I'm going to put myself in the crosshairs because in chapter 4 you talk, and this is why disruption is a challenge for people like me, speaking of you, the distinctive work of becoming a relentless equity solution seeker, RESS, which you also mentioned. And you talk about a panel that we were part of in July of 2020. I remember that, leading through racial tension. That was this whole time during George Floyd. He had recently been murdered. He actually, we're coming up on his 5th anniversary of him being murdered in Minnesota. Take us back to why that chapter and why that was significant enough to include in your book.
Well, Carol, if we put that into perspective now, and when we were on that, when you were on you on the panel you were on, and I was on a subsequent panel,
Hmm.
and the topic for the panel, right? What was it again? It was
Was leading through racial tension. It
yes,
was a
yes.
webinar.
So there
Yeah.
was all this urgency.
Hmm.
I'm pausing because where's the urgency now? It's gone the exact opposite direction. But the point was back
Disappeared.
then, you, Carole Copeland Thomas, been presenting on these issues for your lifetime, just about, would always be so, clear, accessible, etc. But in you that day, we're like, look, folks. And this was how many years ago?
5 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yep.
said, listen, and then I said, I love the way you were straightforward to say, look, we got to start moving here. This is not a time to be sitting and just being nice to each other. I think it's the language you
You did.
use.
Yes. Yep.
And I sent you a text right afterwards on the phone, and you said, we got to stop, we got to do better. We have to do better. We have to do more. See, more and it's, boy, I just had this conversation as part of those videos I was telling you about. Why wasn't, given all the movement, including the fact that, what was it, by that point and a year after, I forget the date, but there was $9.5 billion in the DEI training industry.
Yes. Yep.
Why no glue?
Hmm.
Why didn't it stick? Why didn't the urgency that came out of a horrible incident, obviously, fill the streets of America? Why? This is where America needs to reconcile itself.
Right. Right.
Even though
Well.
even those that are not part of the deniers now or then,
Mm-hmm.
we're like, oh, we have to do this. Well, guess
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, you used the right word. The glue was never in place. It was window dressing for way too many companies. Not like a Costco today,
Yeah, yeah.
as we are recording this, who I honored in March, who pretty much said, hell no, we are not backing away from diversity and DEI. We're making too much money as a result of it. We have over 300,000 employees. We have 100 million members. I'm one of their members now, and it works for us. The business case for diversity was sold to Costco and not sold to a company like Target, who backed away from their 2000 goals and aspirations in terms of DEI work. Yeah. What I said to you, you asked me, you said, "Hey Carole, gotta say," I'm quoting from the book. "Hey Carole, gotta say, I really appreciate your edge, both in tone and in content today. I hope some folks actually go and study the one drop rule," talking about
Oh,
Thomas
yes.
Jefferson and the one drop rule that he had referenced. The legacy of this unjust social hierarchy based on race is not really understood, especially by white folks. Thanks today. And then I said, my response, how the heck are you? Are you still working for the state? How's it going? We are in unprecedented times that demand a different direction, which is what you're talking about in this book. Being nice and having happy talk just won't work anymore because people are dying
Mm.
from COVID, from George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. Again, these horrific events that are taking place, and we're not grasping them the way we should. I want to move away from me and I want to talk about my dear soror, who I read about in your book, is no longer on the planet. She died in 2022. I didn't even realize that until I read your book. And that is my soror, Mabel Milner. Who was she and why is she so significant in your book, Robert?
Well, because we were partners. She became the director of the Office of Multicultural Education at Holy Cross College. I had been doing the work for 10 years without a title. Actually, we have to take a little bit of a backtrack on Mabel and talk about Jackie Peterson, who was the
Mm,
first Black female vice president in Holy Cross history. And when she came in the 90s, after I've been doing the work for a bunch of years, she said, get him in this work because she saw a white guy that was engaging the work, which is, I'm not patting me on the back, but it's an anomaly. It was an anomaly. On college campuses, it was always people of color and women that did the work.
right.
Okay. So then Dr. Mary Nee was the first director and Mabel was the second director of the office. And then we just worked together for years doing programming, both training faculty and staff, as well as we had a program called the Multicultural Peer Educators, MPEs. Their theme was simple. Big red shirt on the back, all it said is tell me more. So their role was to get in spaces and get people to talk to each other across gender, across race, across sexual orientation, etc. But Mabel was a steadfast and boy, it was so many times. I'll give you one story, it's in the book, where I mean, because we were the same age,
Yes.
but she was a Black woman from North Carolina. I was a white guy from Queens, New York. Our lives couldn't have been any more different than they were. So we had this exercise that I developed. I was all excited about. Because I was going to do this then and now of student leadership in higher education for greater equity and access. So the today students at that time, whenever it was 2000, 2001, 2, 3, I don't know. Um, Students of color, white students, were going to come together and mirror what happened in the 60s when white students from the North came down the South and went out into the streets with Black students in the South to get the vote out. So with SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, et cetera, those kind of folks, John Lewis, et cetera, and then white, they got together, they worked together, and I was going to do this role play modeling for the current students. And I got all excited about it. I had the role plays all written out, ready for them to experience the legacy of their student activism around racial equity. That was it. Mabel was
Wow.
just like, and then she said, Bob, she called me Bob. Bob, I see how you think this is a really good exercise, but you know what? It wasn't really all that much fun.
Mm,
So that right there, you and I could have the same conversation.
mhm.
I can talk today, or I could talk then when I was doing that work with Mabel in the Office of Multicultural Education, but we do not have the same life experience, even around the activism for change that we want to see.
Right.
You know how many times professionals of color have said to me in spaces, right here in Holliston, actually, you can say that to
But
the,
I can't.
I
Yeah.
can't,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't.
Hmm. Yeah.
See, this is the distinctive work for people like me to understand what I don't know and what I don't even know I don't know. That's a skill set. I got to practice how to get to that information
Mhm.
because it ain't, if otherwise, I'm going to jump out there and think I know what I'm talking about.
Which is why you put so much detail in your book. And I think it'll be very useful for those who aren't familiar with the different cultures in America to get a sense of it, glean from it, from this masterful book that you've written.
Well,
Chapter 8. Go
yeah,
ahead. Go
I was just going to say, Carol, this goes on to this day. Last week, I sat in a very powerful program right here in Holliston, Massachusetts. Congratulations, Holliston. It's called Mythbusters around LGBTQ issues.
ahead.
There was a wonderful presenter, um, Bob Fritz Warby, who's a member. She's the president of Diverse Holliston. She presented, and she was fabulous. She had a panel of folks from diverse backgrounds in terms of gender identity and sexual orientation. And I listened to the life stories of these individuals, including some people that were transitioning or transgender. No experience with that, obviously, whatsoever. I'm heterosexual. I'm cisgender. I identify with the sex of my birth.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to their stories, and I knew I had to turn the table to talk. So here we are. This could be as much of a problem as it is a solution. We're going to listen to the stories of those that are underserved, underrepresented, even demonized. In this case, as people of color have been also.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to listen to their stories, and then we're going to feel good because we access information, walk away. No, 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 wait a second. What about me? What about me? What about my cisgenderness and my heterosexuality being socialized for a lifetime, then demonized, for example, gay people? No exaggeration, the AMA, American Medical Association, American Psychological, called it a disease years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm making the point to say that one of the individuals said to me, "This is so powerful, Carole. Here's what I'm trying to think about deconstructing my own heterosexism per se." And the person had an empathy of me, say, I hear you trying to deal with the misinformation that came your way just because that's what society said, and as even as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you, Carole, it was the most powerful moments of my life to learn in that space what
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know about my own challenges to break out of that misinformation, if that makes any sense.
It does. It does. And again, I'm looking at the parallels between the book, the history within the book, and what is happening to this very moment. It can be pulled. And speaking of that, when I look at chapter 8, chapter says it's more please reinventing us with the power of a new public will for the common good. I think it's probably your shortest chapter
I think
that you
it
have
is.
here. It's not long at all. It's not 80 pages. And then the rest with your epilogue. How can we take the information from the first part, second part, third part of the book as we're looking at this fourth part, chapter 8, going forward? Where do we go from here? Talk to us about that part of your.
Yeah. Well, um, I'm I'm a believer. I'm I believe in the power of our humanity. If we can collectively hold on to the handlebars of ourselves, um, and that's very challenged right now because the point about these kind of conversations I just referenced, that's exactly why they don't want them to happen because people
Mhm.
are going to make connections. They're going to reinvent
Right.
the people. Okay. Um, so how do you break it down to a touch point that's, because at the federal level right now, it's a horror show, and my ability to influence that right now is a challenge, obviously. I got to still keep it in mind, but
Mhm.
down to my a point, sphere of influence.
Mhm.
Think global, act local. Think global, act local has
Act
been around
locally.
forever, right?
Right.
As a mindset. I just had so I'm part of a couple of groups that just get together and have this one group is called the Disruptors. Who are all white in this group. We get together monthly and we just talk about the work, how we're going to do it. I mean, to your question, and we decided we wanted to break apart into populations that we thought we could more target to create the change, to create greater civic engagement,
Hmm.
to get people to not just either say, well, that's not my problem, or what am I going to do? Or I'm so busy, all these reasons people are not engaged.
Right.
And we broke it down to, there's folks that are absolutely naysayers and resistant, you know, that's a group. There's folks that do that throw the hands up in the air piece. And what am I going to do? We zeroed in on the group that would do more if they knew how to do more,
Correct.
right? So not that any of those other groups are not, worth addressing, but we felt that more pliable. So that's the piece which for me, look, because I'm a believer, because I believe in our capacity, if we come together to do the work we need, then I'm going to continue to do what I did as a band director. Let's make music, folks. Let's come together. All right. So and finally, Carole, I believe we need to go on the offensive with our values. In the face of this denial, of this demonization, everything that can happen to divide us is to say, no, I believe that greater health and well being for more of us is what I need to spend more time on. And so do you. Let's do it. LET apostrophe S. Let's us do it over and over to go. Nobody's going to tell me. People want to argue about whether DEI is right turn. I'm not getting into that argument.
Mhm.
Okay? Because what diversity, equity, inclusion is is the work of creating greater equal access for more of us, not just some of us, which therefore could create a potential for us to come together more equitably and have a public will for the common good and create the change we need. So there's a sequence there. Nobody, if people are distressed because they can't pay their bills, if 30 million Americans don't have a living wage and many of them are food insecure, you're right, Carole. What are they going to, how, you think they're going to be at the table of change agency?
No, no. They're
So,
going
but
to
I have that stability, mobility, and safety. So that's the distinctive work for me.
You say in your final thoughts, as a white cisgender heterosexual guy, this is distinctive work I need to do to play a greater role in advancing greater access and equity. It begins with recognizing my unique quality of life, rich in mobility, stability, and safety. There are others like me who know these riches and have power and influence as a result. There have been other books written, other comments made. I think about white fragility, white fragility that was written before COVID. Always pointing to the fact that no, you can't expect the people of color, BIPOC community, to do all the work, that the work in some ways has to be initiated by, in your example, of somebody like Robert Principe in order for it to be systemic and effective. And I think you've made your point very well. And excuse me while I skip a beat, working to reinvent my life as and leadership as a white guy, as you aptly point up and show the profile of your wonderful book. 5 words or less as we end this interview. What's next? What's next with the book
Mm.
and where the book can go now that you've written it? What's next?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My wonderful partner in life, my wife Joy, reminds me, you wrote a book. I gotta say, because it's like, you wrote a book. So let's recognize the milestone, but then what? So I want to use this as a catalyst for the conversation needs for all of us need to be part of. So I'm gonna say it right here, and Carole, you let me know. I'm ready to speak and lead conversations anytime, any place. Parts of the book, it says it's a lot. It's my life story, basically. So I couldn't get it done in 5 minutes and for 50 pages. It's a long book, but it's our story too, per se. So next is as many times I can get in spaces to support us going where we need to go as a collaborative partnership across our very different life experiences. That's got to be part of it. We're not all the same. And then to take that awareness and greater connection to then dig into the system. So like you said in the book, there's a lot of examples of how to do that. Like I said, some folks don't know how to do it. Well, I'm ready to talk. So
Mhm.
bring me talk to your community, your school, your church, your organization to be able to because Carol, you know this. There ain't a lot of white guys doing this. So it is different. And you also know this. And I've had a number of colleagues of color with the DEI people and say, you got to get in here because when I walk in the room, they sit back and want to be taught.
Mm,
Versus you walk in the room, at least they go, what's he doing here?
mm.
This is
Right.
diversity, equity, inclusion. Do you know, Carol, when I was when I was at Beaver Country Day and the director of diversity and multicultural affairs, this is a true story. I reported to Rob Connor, a black male. He was vice president of the school. And this is a true story, parents and kids alike, who would take families on tours, administrative offices. They'd port to Rob Connor's office and say, this is the director of diversity's office. They said, no, 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 no. It's the white guy down the hall because they just assumed, that's a true story, would
Yeah.
assume it was the black guy.
Right.
So it's an anomaly for
Mm,
me to be leading this. And every white person needs to understand that's distinctive. We need to have this conversation.
mhm.
So I'm ready to lead that. That's what this is a resource for.
It's great. Yeah, that is great. And I always like to end with my special guest with three questions. We've had a great conversation about Excuse Me While I Skip a Beat, Working to Reinvent My Life, and Leadership as a White Guy by Robert Principe. Robert Principe, what do most people not know about you?
Yeah. I used to say this all the time. I think more people know about it now, but I've surfed since I was like 13, 14 years old. I actually got out of the water. I'm 73 now. I got out of the water when I was 70, but and that part of that was COVID related. But I'm gonna get back in because I'm an ocean person. I'm a water person. So even if I can't do anything, I'm just gonna get out there and flop around. So that might be it.
I like it. Up here in this area or down
Oh
in
yeah,
Florida?
well, I go south to Narragansett, Rhode Island.
Okay, that's still cold water.
Well,
Talking about North Carolina, Florida, Georgia,
yeah. No, I've always
warmer
been up
water.
here. New York, Long Island. Same
Yes.
stuff, Cole.
Oh boy. Okay. Number two, in addition to this book you have just written masterfully so, what book or movie do you like or is
Uh,
your favorite?
yeah, I hear you. There's a lot. There's a bunch, but there's one especially to me that says about this work in one phrase. It's Good Will Hunting
Hmm.
is the movie. And I just love it. It's that classism of intellect. Here's a guy who's pushing a floor sweeper that's a brilliant at MIT,
Hmm.
right? Will Hunter, whatever his last name is. Anyway, but there's a scene in the movie where one of his buddies, just they're street folks, working class folks, are gonna go down the end of the bar and meet the girls and something. This is in a Harvard bar. So his buddy goes down the end of the bar and he starts trying to talk to the girls, and then this Harvard guy comes over and he's gonna try to really kind of put him down. Hey, because he's talking to the girls, say, hey, I think I know you from surveys or something like that, a class, and the other guy comes and says, well, what? Tell me about that class. And then he goes in. Then he gets really nasty with him and says, "Well, can you tell me about the colonial Garrett, agricultural?" Ask him some fancy question, and Will is listening. On the second question, he steps right in front of him, and he gives them the exactly where this guy plagiarized the question from the book and the page.
Wow.
But then he says to him after he absolutely dismantles this horrible person trying to make fun of this other guy to make himself look good in front of his girl, he says one sentence, Carol. Number one, don't do that. There's a life piece there. Do not, for your gain, put others down. So
Pow-
that's my favorite movie right there.
Oh, powerful, powerful. And number three,
Yeah.
where on the planet do you want to travel? What's on your bucket list?
Yeah, I got to go back. I'm Italian American. I say that on purpose. Um, and I've been to Italy once,
Mm.
just once. And when I went, I was looking for some roots. I found it in Cortona because it was a village. I'm Sicilian.
Oh, mm.
So I want to go back to the village to make more of that distinctive connect. I went to Rome. I grew up in New York. It's this big city. What do you want from me? But the village, you got to get off the bus and walk up the hill because the bus can't get, it's too small. But that circle piece in the village, I got to go back to Italy again, Carole, to do more of my roots connection.
I'm gonna hold you to it. I'm gonna hold you to it. Robert Principe, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest on my program. You have taught us, you've informed us, and inspired us based on your life journey and how you want this book to touch the lives of so many others. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carole. Take
All
care.
right. Take care.
Appreciate the opportunity. Always good to connect with you.
Thank you for listening to Conversations with Carole. Spread the word and tell friends and colleagues that this podcast is tailor made for them. Make sure you subscribe, and we welcome your comments and reviews on your favorite podcast platform. Visit us at CaroleCopelandThomas.com and listen to all of the episodes and learn about my speaking services there. Thanks again, and we'll see you back next week for an exciting new show. See you soon.